The moment I saw the name Law Office of Mitchell and Brax in his inbox, I knew. There was no panic, no screaming, just a hollow thud in my chest, like someone had quietly pulled the rug out from under me while I was sleeping. My husband had hired a divorce attorney behind my back, and he hadn't said a word. It wasn't curiosity that made me open the email. It was intuition. That twitch in your gut when something doesn't sit right, even in a perfect house with marble floors and filtered air. The subject line read, "Initial consultation materials." My hands trembled as I clicked. Inside, a detailed summary of assets, our assets, bullet points about offshore accounts, equity portfolios, real estate holdings, and then, client wishes to explore options for minimizing spousal claim. Client, my husband, Graham. He thought I wouldn't find out. That he'd orchestrate my erasure in silence. That I'd smile at breakfast while he planned my financial funeral. That I was too distracted, too trusting, too comfortable in our $50 million life to suspect a thing. But what he forgot is that I built that fortune with him. Every investment, every calculated risk, every dollar we made it together. And while he handled the public face of our empire, I managed the structure, the strategy, the skeleton he was now trying to strip clean. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just leaned back in his office chair, the email still glowing on the screen, and whispered to myself, "You just made your last move, Graham. Now it's my turn." That night, I cooked dinner like nothing had changed. Roasted salmon, his favorite. Poured his wine. Smiled across the table. He kissed my cheek before bed. Said he had an early meeting. I nodded. Sleep well, love. But sleep was the last thing on my mind. Because by morning, the account would be gone. Graham and I were the couple people envied, at least from the outside. He wore expensive suits like Second Skin, gave speeches that made boardrooms go silent. I handled the money behind the curtain, the skeleton of every deal. We weren't just partners in marriage. We were a brand, built from nothing. Built together. I met him at a tech conference in San Diego, 13 years ago. I was consulting for a fintech startup. He was pitching a seed fund. He liked that I didn't laugh at his jokes. I liked that he respected numbers more than ego, least back then. He proposed with a sapphire instead of a diamond. "You're not like other women," he said. I believed that was a compliment. We moved fast, merged finances before rings, created a shared dream, not a shared identity. People called us modern power couple. Our first million came from an early crypto deal. The rest? Real estate, private equity, market timing, luck, discipline, a little bit of risk, a lot of calculation. Graham was always better at people. I was better at reading patterns. He could charm an investor into tripling our round. I could spot a dying asset before the stock even dipped. We made a good team. I thought we made a good marriage too. We never fought about money. We talked like business partners. Meetings over dinner, weekend retreats that doubled as brainstorming sessions. If there were problems, they were buried under productivity. I mistook efficiency for intimacy. Even when he started pulling away, traveling more, working later, I blamed stress, not betrayal. I never suspected him. Not when he forgot anniversaries. Not when he lost his wedding ring on a ski trip. Not even when I noticed he'd stopped touching me like I was his wife and started treating me like a colleague. I'd been raised to believe trust was the foundation of love. My father used to say, "If you're checking his phone, you've already lost," so I didn't check. Not until that night. Not until his laptop glitched open on our shared kitchen counter while he was in the shower. The irony was brutal. Because in trying to be the cool, unbothered wife, I gave him every inch of rope he needed to prepare his exit strategy. And he used it, quietly, strategically, just like I would. But what Graham forgot, I was always the one who read the fine print. The signs had been there, not flashing neon, but subtle shifts in his rhythm, enough to register if you were paying attention. And the thing is, I wasn't. Not then. I chalked the distance up to stress. Told myself marriage evolves. That love looks different after a decade. But now, looking back, every red flag glows. He started changing passwords. First, it was the trading app. We'd always used a shared login, but one day, I was locked out. "Just tightening security," he said. I didn't question it. Then came the email. Then the burner phone he kept in his gym bag, which I assumed was a work thing. It wasn't. He stopped discussing deals with me. We used to analyze everything together, spreadsheets over wine, debate over takeout. But recently, he'd say, "I'll handle this one." Or worse, "Don't worry your head about it." As if I were suddenly fragile or expendable. Simone started showing up more. She was just a co-worker, but she lingered too long at our parties, laughed too hard at his jokes, always managed to sit beside him. She once brought him a Mont Blanc pen engraved with his initials. He told me it was a thank you gift. I didn't ask what for. The intimacy died quietly. No dramatic breakup. Just less. Less touch. Less talking. Less eye contact. The last time we had sex, he called me baby, like he was reading a script. I lay there afterward and stared at the ceiling, wondering when I became optional. Then there was the trip to Lisbon. 3 days, supposedly for a real estate pitch. But I found a receipt in his pocket for a couple's massage. The receipt was in her name, Simone Martin. When I asked, he said it was a team-building exercise. I laughed. He didn't. I told Lena about it. My best friend and a damn good attorney. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Start documenting everything. You're being set up." I wanted to argue. Instead, I wrote down every instance, every slip, every transaction that didn't add up. But the worst part? He started treating me like a guest in our home. He took calls in locked rooms, deleted his browser history, said, "You're overreacting," every time I voiced a concern. That's when I knew the gaslighting had begun. Subtle. Measured. Deadly. I stopped asking questions. I started watching. And the more I saw, the more I realized. He wasn't planning a future with me. He was planning one without me, and he thought I wouldn't notice. The final confirmation didn't come from a stranger. It came from his printer. An accident. A misstep. Graham had forgotten to pick up a print job from the study. I found the pages while he was out jogging, tucked neatly in the tray. Legal. Templates. Divorce drafts. Division of property. His name signed digitally at the bottom. There was a clause highlighted in yellow. Spouse shall not be entitled to assets acquired via discretionary investment accounts prior to dissolution. Name was nowhere on the document. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Graham was preparing to erase me with the same cold precision he used on hostile takeovers. Except this time, I was the acquisition being liquidated. I sat down and reread the draft. The strategy was clear. Isolate assets, claim separate ownership, initiate a clean break under the guise of irreconcilable differences. I was labeled the dependent spouse. Me, who had calculated every percentage point of our portfolio, negotiated every tax loophole. He'd reduced me to a liability. That's when I stopped believing this was personal. This was tactical, and that hurt even more. He wasn't just leaving me. He was positioning himself to win. I remembered the night we opened our first joint account, champagne in hand, grinning like idiots. "No secrets," he said. "We're in this together." That was $50 million ago. Before the houses, the press mentions, the smiling dinner party photos, before the lies. I called Lena. She didn't hesitate. You need to protect yourself. Now. Her voice was firm, angry, protective. She walked me through every step. What to look for, how to move, when to strike. It felt clinical, but I needed clinical. Emotion wasn't useful anymore. The humiliation sharpened me, cooled me. I stopped wondering why. I stopped imagining what I'd done wrong. This wasn't about failure. It was about power. About a man who thought he could rewrite the story and cast me as a footnote. I watched him return from his jog, sweat glistening, a smile on his face. He kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't just drafted my financial death sentence that morning. I smiled back. Because what he didn't know was that the moment he hit print, he signed his defeat, and I was already preparing mine. That night, while Graham slept next to me, snoring softly, arm draped across the empty space between us, I stared at the ceiling and made a list. Not of emotions, of actions. I counted accounts, passwords, legal contacts, every asset we owned together. Every account I had access to. He thought he was the only strategist in the marriage, but he forgot. I was the one who built our financial architecture. By morning, I had a plan. The first move was digital. I reset every password linked to our joint accounts, set up alerts for any large transactions, froze all non-essential transfers. My name was on everything. He hadn't moved fast enough to change that, and now he wouldn't get the chance. I began the transfer of $50 million, our main joint account, into a protected trust in my name. One I created under a legal structure Lena had walked me through, step by step. It wasn't theft. It was defense. Protection. A preemptive strike against a man who had already weaponized deceit. Next came the documentation. I made digital copies of every receipt, every contract, every email that proved my contributions. I compiled records of every investment I'd managed, every deal I'd structured. It wasn't petty, it was evidence. Graham moved like a thief in the dark. I moved like an auditor with a flashlight, and I didn't make a sound. I scheduled a meeting with Lena for Monday. We set the papers in motion: trust establishment, preliminary divorce response, asset protection. She called it clean surgery. I called it survival. He kissed me goodbye on his way to the gym, told me he might be late, that he had a meeting with a new partner. I nodded, heart steady. Take your time, I said. We're in no rush. Because I knew what he didn't. The account was already gone. I checked the balance 5 times. 0. Not in a panic way. In a checkmate way. I stood in front of the mirror that night and looked at myself. Not the wife, not the co-founder, not the fixture beside the powerful man. Just the woman who finally chose herself. The collapse wasn't loud. It was surgical, precise, and irreversible. Once the account was safe, I shifted into investigator mode. I needed to know everything. Not just what Graham was planning, but who he really was beneath the smooth surface. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for truth. Cold, documented, undeniable. I started with his travel records. We shared a digital itinerary system meant to keep us synced on business trips. He forgot to remove access. Turns out, Graham had been to Paris twice in the last 3 months. He told me he was in Boston. Simone had posted photos from those same dates: champagne glasses, boutique balconies, a man's silhouette reflected in the window. She was either careless or arrogant, probably both. I archived every image. Next, I combed through his work expenses: dinners for 2, jewelry, hotel rooms, all billed as client entertainment. I cross-referenced them with my own calendar. The man had been building a second life, funded by our empire, while smiling across the table like nothing was wrong. I pulled call logs, chat histories, emails. I found a folder labeled Next Phase on his desktop. Password protected. I cracked it. Inside, divorce projections, asset breakdowns, notes about strategic distancing. It was a blueprint for betrayal. Every line of it written in that clean, clinical tone he used in board meetings. He'd even consulted a PR firm, planning the announcement of our divorce as a mutual, peaceful parting. Image control, narrative management. There was a mock-up of a joint statement we were supposedly going to release. I wasn't devastated anymore. I was furious. Not because he cheated, though he did, but because he assumed I'd stay quiet, that I'd accept the story he wrote for me, that I'd be the graceful wife walking away with a broken heart and a polite smile. I remembered something my father once said. The most dangerous kind of man is the one who forgets you're watching. Graham forgot, so I kept watching. I compiled everything: dates, documents, screenshots, receipts, into a private archive. Not for revenge, for leverage, for truth, for my freedom. Lena and I built our case brick by brick. I wasn't just protecting money anymore. I was protecting myself from erasure, from being reduced to a footnote in a man's exit strategy. Graham thought the game was his. He didn't know I'd already rewritten the rules. The morning Graham discovered the account was empty, I was sipping tea on the balcony, wrapped in silk, sunlight spilling across my lap. He stormed into the room like a man whose empire had just crumbled, because it had. Quietly, perfectly, without warning. "Where is it?" he asked, voice low, controlled. But his eyes were wild. I looked up, calm. "Where's what?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew what he meant. I took another sip. "Oh, the account? The one with both our names on it?" He blinked, rage cracking through his polished exterior. I almost admired how long it took for his mask to slip. Almost. "I'm calling the bank." I shrugged. "Go ahead. Everything was legal, transparent. You'd know that if you hadn't been busy drafting my financial execution behind my back." He froze. That was the moment he realized I knew. Knew about the lawyer. Knew about Simone. Knew about every strategic betrayal masked as business. I handed him a file. Thick. Annotated. "You'll find everything in here. Your travel receipts. Your emails. Your draft documents." The mock press release was a nice touch, by the way. So tasteful. He didn't touch the folder. I leaned closer. "You wanted a clean break. This is as clean as it gets." He opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time in our entire marriage, he had nothing to say. Lena filed the countersuit that afternoon. Aggressive. Unapologetic. She called it elegant revenge. I called it justice. Full asset protection. Evidence of bad faith. Request for sole control of our remaining joint ventures. And spousal misconduct? Well documented. Simone? She went quiet, probably realizing she was just a tool. A pawn in a game that was never about love. Graham's power came from control, and I'd stripped that from him with precision. He tried to negotiate, tried to talk privately. I refused. Everything went through attorneys. Every call, every clause, every ounce of civility had expired. Our final settlement was brutal. For him. Fair for me. And when it was signed, sealed, and finished, I walked out of that courtroom in heels and calm, because I hadn't just survived the betrayal. I'd won. 6 months later, I live in a penthouse I chose myself. No shared titles. No silent resentment wrapped in stone countertops and curated art. Just clean air, soft light, and silence I welcome. Not fear. The money's secure. But more importantly, I am. I no longer check shadows for sabotage. I don't audit love like a spreadsheet. I walk barefoot across cold marble floors and smile, because every inch of this space was earned, not just financially, but emotionally. I built my peace from the ashes of his strategy. The headlines came and went. Power couple no more. Divorce rocks investment firm. I said nothing. Offered no interviews. Let him drown in whispers and speculation. Let the public decide which version of the truth to believe. I didn't need to speak. I wrote instead. Quietly, truthfully, about betrayal, financial abuse, emotional intelligence, and the strength required to leave before you're erased. The essays went viral, not because they were angry, but because they were real. Simone? Last I heard, she left the company. Whether by force or regret, I'll never know. I don't check anymore. That chapter's closed. And Graham? He's still trying to repair his image. He'll spend the next decade rebuilding a reputation I shattered with silence. I went back to investing, but only in women-led ventures. Women, like me. Women rebuilding after collapse. I sit on panels, lead workshops, teach how to protect yourself before the betrayal, not after. And every time someone asks how I stayed so calm, I tell them the truth. Rage doesn't win wars. Strategy does. Sometimes I still think about the night I found the email, about how I almost deleted it, about how close I was to pretending again. But then I remember that moment didn't destroy me. It revealed me, because he booked a lawyer behind my back, but I moved our empire out from under him and didn't spill a single drop.